Hi and welcome to upsidersiformation. I'm a medical astrologer going financial, and today we're going to talk about the upcoming solar eclipse on October 2nd. First, I have to make a disclaimer. I'm not a financial advisor and this is not financial advice. This is for informational purposes only. That being said, astrology influences the psyche and we know markets to be emotional. So astrology is to give you the heads up so you can have an edge. Think of astrology as another indicator, and indicators are about probabilities over possibility. And remember, eclipse influence is not just the day off. Eclipse season is about 6 weeks and we have 2 eclipses, so 2 weeks prior, 2 weeks in between, and 2 weeks after. But they have ripple effects that extend up to the next eclipse season 6 months from now and even until their anniversary a year from now. Since lunar eclipses are terminations, they have more of a 3-month influence, but they are paired with solar eclipses, which are new beginnings, and they have a longer span that can have ripple effects for a couple of years. Now, let's analyze the general astrology for this annular solar eclipse. It's annular because it looks like a ring of fire. That alone tells you that the eclipse is like a portal. But a portal for what? As I mentioned in my previous video, eclipses are omens of world events that are catalysts that propel change in the psyche of the collective, usually raising consciousness, hopefully. Solar eclipses are new moons on steroids, and new moons are new beginnings, but this one is conjunct the south node of releasing. So it's a new beginning that comes at a price, where you have to sacrifice something in order to have a clean slate. Now, this eclipse doesn't come along because there are other events coming up. A comet, a possible supernova event from the star Betelgeuse, solar flares and storms with solar maximum 25, and we're going to have a second moon. All of these events together are bringing in illumination. They are assisting with the awakening of the planet through critical mass, which is the point of maximum energy buildup that generates a catalyst reaction of change, if you will, what they call the end times, which is not about the end, but the end of the old world, that it already started in 2020, and we're not going back. We are in very pivotal times because depending on which way we choose to go, we're between an utopia or a dystopia. Now, eclipse season affects the barometric pressure and that influences water. Since we are 70% water, we can deal with swelling and inflammation, both literally and metaphorically, getting overreactive and intolerant. If you have kids, you may notice they become like little psychos during eclipse season. But if you add another moon to the equation, this is a rare event and it adds to the lunatic energy. Lunatic coming from luna, which is moon in Spanish. And the moon is constantly changing, making up for a moody vibe. So we're going to be hypersensitive and overreactive. And these times are a spiritual test where you'd better off raising above and practicing gratefulness, because if you fall for the victimhood mentality, you're always going to find or even generate a perpetrator. And you don't want to bring that energy to this portal. So that would be a good thing to release. Eclipses are revelations and they are volatile like Uranus transits, so skeletons come out of the closets, and because it's in Libra, it affects relationships and contracts. Libra rules the 7th house of partnership and represents the scales of justice. So a lot of people are going to put their foot down on unfair practices, unilateral agreements, and parasitic and dependent situations, from the personal to the collective, from the geopolitical to the financial. And the sun is at fall in Libra because we enter fall, and Libra, the symbol is a sunset. So the sun represents leader, and the sun is eclipse next to the south node of termination and at fall. So this could simply talk about the changing of the leaders through election or even a coup or assassinations. And we already have a soft coup with Biden. They didn't invoke the 25th Amendment. They just replaced the candidate without primaries. Then we had two assassination attempts on Trump, and there's more to come, I'm afraid, and many terrorist leaders around the world being terminated. And with Uranus, the planet of shock, retrograde, and conjunct the fixed star Algol, again, the demon star of losing the head, metaphorically and literally, which coincided with Trump's first attempt when Uranus was direct, and now is retrograde. There are 3 passes total in this aspect, so we have another coming up. The eclipse is conjunct Mercury, the planet of news, going from Cassimi to combust, meaning from being crowned by the sun to being burned by it, and then conjunct the eclipse. So there will be heat and hostile words that will prompt terminations. And with Black Moon Lilith there, that is the lunar apogee, meaning the furthest position from the Earth on the ecliptics, is like the Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, is another indication for skeletons out of the closet that expedite endings. But this in turn will create room for something new, from something better. And we're seeing a lot of this in the media with P. Diddy arrested by the lunar eclipse. But what you have to know is that what they're showing you is just the tip of the iceberg. It's like the fall man, and there's a lot more to come, and that includes politicians too. Because this is about control files. That's how they manipulate influential people as to influence the masses with endorsements and so on. And there's a bigger battle behind the stage. This is really a spiritual battle. It's a battle of good versus evil, truth versus corruption. Especially because we have Jupiter, the great magnifier, in Gemini, the sign of the news, but is in detriment here. So when they show you a story, watch for the one that they're hiding. Now, Jupiter is in a beneficial sextile with wounded Chiron, so there's a healing in setting the record straight. And a lot of what you're seeing is the result of the white hats work. Those people or entities anywhere from the military to governmental programs and beyond, without any recognition or accolades, organize for the sovereignty of the common good against the deep state. And yes, the shadow government is real, and it's commonly known as the establishment. Now, the eclipse is ruled by Venus, the money planet, but is in detriment in Scorpio, the sign of investment, and is in an aversion aspect with the eclipse, so there's a blind spot, something we don't see coming. So there's something brewing behind the scenes, and I think we can all feel it. It's obvious in the geopolitical scenario, but economics and geopolitics are 2 sides of the same coin. The markets continue to be artificially propped at least until election season. But with the Fed going all in with cuts of 50 basis points, we know that's a red flag that brings repercussions that we have yet to see. Even though we suffer it on a daily basis every time we put gas or do groceries. But they have changed the definition of recession and lied about the job reports. So you have to understand that everything is manipulated as per the convenience of the puppets in chief. The eclipse is also in a square with war planet Mars, adding fuel to the fires of conflict around the world. Mars is in Cancer, is aggression that is in a shell, so it's not frontal, it's moving sideways like a crab, like a proxy war. And I don't have to tell you that we are in a couple of them. That's why we send so much money on weaponry abroad, because we have a dog in the fight. Other territories that we claim to protect are actually our battlefield. Up until our enemies had it and make it feel at home again, like in 9/11. And that's the whole premise of the Obama's movie Leave the World Behind, which, if you haven't seen, I recommend it. Not just spook you out, but if anything, being aware is to be prepared. Because if an ex-president produces a movie like that, it begs the question, what does he know that we don't? And I talk more about that in my previous video about the lunar eclipse, which if you hadn't seen, I also recommend watching, because even though the lunar eclipse happened already, the long-term influence stands for the months to come. Now, with the cosmic lovers at odds, Mars at fault in Cancer is a crabby crab, and Venus, the sign of diplomacy, in detriment in Scorpio, the sign ruled by warrior Mars, both in water signs, especially after a lunar eclipse in Pisces, the sign of the fishes, and with the North Node conjunct Neptune, the Lord of the Seas, we're feeling like drowning. And on the world stage, there has been a lot of water-related emergencies around the world as predicted in my previous video, both natural and manipulated. Natural due to the shifting of the Earth axis, which produces all these weather changes, what they call warming, but in some areas is actually cooling. And the scientific community is divided over this. Some censor and others bot and push for agendas. And some weather events could be related to some of these patterns to target certain areas as per plans like 15-minute cities beyond. And this is something that happened in Hawaii and in Acapulco, which they didn't air after the Hawaii backlash, and in other sites. But I don't want to open that Pandora box. I already got a strike in a previous channel that I terminated. Thankfully, Mars and Venus are in a positive grand trine with Saturn, the planet of structure, authority, and order. So whatever happens is of a higher divine order. The eclipses are not the time to be in control. They're fated times, and it pays off to have faith. Especially since from the heliocentric, meaning the sun's perspective, and the sidereal/Vedic astrology, the eclipse is in Virgo, where it's ruled by communicative Mercury, which is exalted and in domicile. So whatever we experience as hardship on Earth carries a spiritual message from above. You can think of Western and Vedic astrology as different points of view on the same picture, like a 6 and a 9 when we're across each other. But the eclipse is challenging in conjunction with Saturn, the planet of authority, rules, and the justice system. And we see a lot of lawsuits, but don't kid yourself. They're mostly political persecution in the form of prosecution. And this is regardless of your personal opinions on mean orange man. Understand that your pre-existing hate has been weaponized against you, making you feel good about feeling bad, giving you the container where to deposit that hate, and telling you that you're a good person if you hate who they want you to hate, using virtue signaling as a moral compass, no different than the person that goes to church and then mistreats the waiter. They use social resentment, camouflage under good-sounding words like equity, which is actually a term that has been appropriated from the financial world and really refers to property. And a lot of money and effort is aimed at convincing herds and getting the boogeyman out. So what's the real threat to democracy here? And I don't know about you, but I stopped believing about boogeymen at 3. And a lot of money and effort is aimed at dividing us to distract us from the common thread because, as Reagan said, there's no right and left as you see it. It's more top and bottom. And we are at the bottom. So what they tell you is convenient for them, hence not for us. And by them, I mean the deep state, which has infiltrated both sides. And so it's good to be independent, and they own the media. So they tell you the story they want you to believe. That's why I call them the weapons of mass distraction. Rings a bell? And that's very Neptune in Pisces, the Roman bread and circus, so to speak. Thankfully, most of the other aspects in the eclipse are harmonious, and solar eclipses are not about conflict and like lunar eclipses. A solar eclipse is when the sun and the moon join, so it talks more about alliances, if anything, even if this is with a south node of karma and release. So Bobby Kennedy's alliance is an example of that. He let go of the race in order to start an unlikely partnership where they can compromise, work on the common ground and respect their differences in order to further the health agenda, which is aligned with his mission. By the way, recently the UN was quietly voting on the World Health Organization pandemic treaty, which tramples the Constitution. So I don't know what happened with that. We also have a supportive grand sextile with the outer planets, which they move slow due to the distance, and therefore this configuration is going to hold for a while, and they influence generation mostly. But they're all retrograde, and we're all reviewing what's going on, and there's some corrective action taking place. All of these outer planets will change in 2025 from earth and water elements to fire and air. So energy is going to speed up. And with Pluto soon going back to Aquarius, a new world is in order, but hopefully not the new world order by the unelected officials of the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset agenda of 2030 of you will own nothing, any crickets. Now, let's see how this can affect the markets. And again, there's a mixed bag of aspect on the day off and following the eclipse, from the good, the bad, and the ugly, some of which have more immediate influence, some others will more long-term. Eclipses can be tricky and volatile, indicating changes in trend. As I mentioned in my previous video, let me show you what the lunar eclipse did with metals, for example. The day off and the day after, both with gold and silver, respectively, on the 17th and on the 18th of September. Now, this is not very dramatic, and in the long term, I expect metals to continue to rise as per the weakening of the dollar versus the BRICS and increasing commodities values as per the many wars around the world. Also, the Fed went all in with cutting 50 basis points, which tells us we're worse than they dare to admit. And someone was asking me, what does this mean for the housing market? Well, there's been a lot of talk about the real estate bubble, and yes, houses have been higher than ever, but what drives markets is the balance between offer and demand. So it depends on the area, and I'll shy away from making blank statements because averages don't represent people. And if you follow the previously mentioned Whitney Webb, she would argue to own your home is the most secure way to survive the reset. Even though Cami plans to put a 44% tax on home sales and a 25% tax on the equity while you still live in it. That would be the demise of the middle class. But if you think that you're better off renting, well, landlords would have to factor this into the rent because they cannot run at a deficit. Unless they come up with some kind of cap for renting like they did during the pandemic when they told people they could skip rent while they were receiving checks and they were still enforcing mortgages. That tells you there's a plan for depossession, but it's not limited to real estate market. This applies to stocks too. And there's certainly a war on crypto with the SEC ambiguous regulations. In my experience, something I learned is that you cannot live in a Bitcoin. And unless you can get away with no paying a roof over your head, you have to pay rent anyway, which is not tax deductible. It doesn't build equity and it only goes up with inflation and time. Now the Fed cutting rates makes buying cheaper and commensurable with rent. And I ran the numbers of how much money you'd lose to depreciation versus renting. And depending on the percentage, you can still break even. Because let's say you buy a $350,000 home and your mortgage, including taxes and insurance, is almost $2,500 versus a $2,500 monthly rent. In a year, you would have paid for any of them $30,000. So if your house were to depreciate at a rate of almost 8 to 9% a year, your loss would be equal to the money you would lose renting anyway. But assets go up and down in time, so unless you need to sell, you can always recover the loss. You can recover the investment. So overall, if you can afford to buy, I find it recommendable. And you could wait for prices to go down, but in the meantime, you'll have to pay rent. And in the past, when I did that, rates increased, so it was a wash. Because what I didn't pay for the house, now I had to pay for the bank. Overall, I had never regret buying. But this is not financial advice. Now let's see the crypto market. And I'm gladly surprised that Bitcoin outperformed negative astro influences that historically had been bearish, even though eclipse timing is the trickiest time in the market, so we're not safe yet. But as always, regardless of your risk tolerance, you might want to wait for confirmation of any trend to avoid false signals and bull and bear traps as the markets try to squeeze both sides of the game. I also found out what the reason for Bitcoin performance could be. I heard word of BlackRock manipulating the market. Surprise! The big boys got late in the game with their big bucks and AI algorithm, and I cannot reveal the source, but it's not news that Bitcoin is not what it used to be, that it used to be an alternative to a corrupt money system. But since the ETF, BlackRock calls the shots now, and apparently the algorithm is set to reach 90K. But the question is when, and I'm not talking about a date here, I'm talking about proportions, like will it reach 100K when tomatoes are $100? Because no currency is an island, and as investigative financial journalist Whitney Webb tells, our greed has been weaponized against us. I highly recommend you to follow her because she does a tremendous job at providing behind-the-scenes information. So while in the past, Bitcoin holders were more focused on the ethos of the asset, recently people catching the drift are more concerned with the price. But those two factors might not always agree. And the astrology might not always reflect right away on the price action either, as there are triggers behind the scenes that might take a minute to reflect. Also, astrology doesn't tell you how much it's going to be, but how positive or negative it could be. So any speculation on price action is based on key market levels of support and resistance. I'm not expert at technical analysis, but it is good to have the basis, and I highly recommend you to follow Steve Courtney since he provides a lot of free information and training, and the links are below. He also has alerts to go. Now, let's take a look at the astrology for, in general, for the markets. We have an unfavorable Mars in Cancer, which will last till November. And then mid to end of October, Uranus retrograde conjunct Malefic's fixed star Algol again is volatile and negative for crypto, AI, and the tech sectors. So this could be a buying opportunity for alts, for example. Now, for Bitcoin specifically, we have the Bitcoin Progress Sun conjunct the Bitcoin natal Jupiter till October 5, and is a very positive aspect that contrasts the Eclipse negative aspect and might be another reason why it's been holding strong. Now, Saturn sextile Bitcoin Sun on October from the 6th to the 15th might provide some stability amidst the volatility, so it's a minor positive. Then Jupiter station square to Bitcoin natal Saturn will, until October 23rd, tend to indicate overconfidence, so it's a minor negative. And on October 11th, Pluto will station direct conjunct the Bitcoin natal Jupiter and Progress Sun. This triad tends to be a signature for success, but Pluto represents death and rebirth, power and wealth and regeneration. This is a long transit. It has two phases, the retrograde till October 11 and then direct after. The retrograde being more the problematic phase and the direct being more the renewal phase. And because this is the last of three, it could indicate that we will see more of a bullish phase. So overall, positive aspect beat the negatives, but this is in context with the markets, and the markets are in context with geopolitics. So if there's a black swan event, this could still be detrimental, but not as much as other markets, so you could say that Bitcoin is safer for now. But again, this is not financial advice, this is for entertainment purposes only, so I hope you're entertained, and if so, hit like. If you like, share with your friends. If you don't, share with your enemies, but share anyway. Thank you for listening and see you next time. Namaste.